The gunshot that killed Thomas Jefferson still echoed in Tabitha Jefferson's nightmares, 6 months after they buried him in the hard California earth outside Santa Rosa. She stood in the doorway of their modest ranch house, watching the sun bleed across the horizon, her hands trembling as she clutched yet another letter from the bank demanding payment on debts she had no earthly way to settle. Thomas had been 29 when the fever took him, leaving her a widow at 26 with a ranch drowning in unpaid loans, 3 horses that needed feeding, and a heart so shattered she wondered if it would ever beat properly again. The creditors circled like vultures, and each morning brought fresh worry about how she would survive another day in this unforgiving landscape, where women alone were viewed with either pity or suspicion. Tabitha had never imagined herself in this position. She had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of a seamstress and a clerk, with dreams of a simple, comfortable life. When she met Thomas at a church social in 1872, she thought those dreams would come true. He was handsome, ambitious, and determined to make something of himself ranching in the growing town of Santa Rosa. They married within 6 months, and she followed him to Sonoma County with hope blazing in her chest. The first year had been hard but happy. Thomas worked from dawn until dusk, building their small operation, and she learned to cook on a wood stove, tend a garden, and manage the overwhelming loneliness of frontier life. By their second anniversary, they were finally turning a profit, and Thomas talked excitedly about expanding their herd and maybe, someday soon, starting a family. Then came the winter of 1875, when influenza swept through Santa Rosa like a wildfire through dry grass. Thomas fell ill on a Tuesday morning, complaining of aches and chills. By Friday, he was delirious with fever. By Sunday, he was gone. The doctor's bill came 3 days after the funeral. Adding to the mountain of debt Thomas had quietly accumulated trying to keep the ranch afloat through 2 difficult seasons. Tabitha discovered the extent of their financial trouble only after his death, when the banker, Mr. Whitmore, appeared at her door with papers documenting loans she never knew existed. The total sum was staggering: $800, due within 6 months, or the bank would seize the property and everything on it. She had tried everything she could think of to earn money. She took in laundry from the townspeople, her hands growing raw and chapped from the lye soap and endless scrubbing. She sold her mother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing she owned. She worked at the general store 3 days a week, standing behind the counter measuring out flour and sugar while Mrs. Henderson, the owner, watched her with sad, knowing eyes. But it was never enough. The interest kept accumulating, and the deadline crept closer with terrifying speed. By April of 1876, she was down to her final week before the bank would take everything, and she had only managed to scrape together $215. The hopelessness was suffocating. That was when Russell Foster rode into Santa Rosa on a dusty Thursday afternoon, leading a string of 6 magnificent horses that made every man in town stop and stare. Tabitha was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the general store when he passed, and even in her grief-stricken state, she noticed him. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a winter storm. He wore his gun low on his hip, the way men did when they knew how to use it, but there was something in his face that suggested he would rather not. He was perhaps 30 years old, weathered by sun and wind but undeniably handsome in the way of men who lived hard lives outdoors. When his gaze swept past her, she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach and immediately hated herself for it. Thomas had been gone only 6 months. She had no business noticing other men. Russell Foster was a horse trader by profession and a wanderer by necessity. He had been born in Missouri in 1846, the youngest son of a farmer who lost everything in the border wars that preceded the great conflict between the states. Russell grew up knowing hardship and violence, but instead of letting it harden him into cruelty, he developed an almost philosophical approach to life. He believed in fair dealing, hard work, and leaving places better than he found them. After the war ended when he was 19, he drifted west, learning the horse trade from a half-Shoshone man named Joseph, who taught him how to read an animal's spirit and treat them with respect. By the time he reached California in 1876, Russell had a reputation throughout the territory as someone who sold quality horses at honest prices and never cheated a customer. He had heard about Santa Rosa from other traders who said it was a growing town with prosperous ranchers who might need good stock. What he found was a pleasant enough place, nestled in a valley with rolling hills covered in golden grass and stands of oak trees. The main street had the usual assortment of businesses: saloons, a hotel, the general store, a blacksmith, a bank, and a small church at the far end. Russell took a room at the hotel and spent his first day walking around town, getting a sense of the place and talking to potential customers. By evening, he had sold 3 of his 6 horses to a rancher named Patterson, who needed working animals for his cattle operation. That night, Russell ate dinner at the hotel restaurant and found himself sharing a table with the local doctor, a graying man named Harrison who had kind eyes and a tendency toward conversation. They talked about the usual things, weather and business and the growth of California, until the doctor mentioned the widow who was about to lose her ranch. "Sad situation," Dr. Harrison said, shaking his head as he cut into his beefsteak. "Thomas Jefferson was a good man, worked himself nearly to death trying to make that place succeed. Then the influenza took him, and it turned out he had borrowed heavily from the bank. His widow, Tabitha, has been trying to pay it back, but it's an impossible sum for a woman alone. The bank will foreclose next week, and she will have nothing." Russell listened quietly, sipping his coffee. "How much does she owe?" "Around $600 still, I believe. Maybe a bit less if she managed to earn more this month, but I doubt it. Whitmore at the bank is not known for his charity. He will take that property the moment the deadline passes." Something in the story bothered Russell, though he could not immediately identify what. He had seen plenty of hardship in his 30 years, and while every sad tale touched him, this one seemed to hook into something deeper. Perhaps it was the image of a young woman fighting alone against circumstances that would overwhelm most men. Perhaps it was the fundamental unfairness of it, the way one piece of bad luck could destroy a life. Or perhaps it was simply that he was tired of wandering, and some part of him recognized an opportunity to do something meaningful. "Where is this ranch?" he asked, "Doctor?" Harrison gave him directions, and the next morning, Russell saddled his horse and rode out to see the Jefferson place for himself. It was about 3 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small house, a barn that needed repairs, and about 80 acres of grazing land. He could see immediately that it had potential. The land was good, the water source was reliable, and with proper management, it could support a decent operation. He also saw signs of neglect, the inevitable result of a widow working alone without enough resources or help. Fences needed mending, the barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and the vegetable garden was more weeds than vegetables. Tabitha was in the yard trying to fix a broken wagon wheel when Russell rode up. She straightened when she saw him approach, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. She wore a simple brown dress covered by a work apron, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. even exhausted and covered in dust. She was beautiful, with delicate features and expressive brown eyes that held both wariness and weariness. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the obvious tension in her shoulders. Russell dismounted and removed his hat respectfully. "Morning, madam. My name is Russell Foster. I am a horse trader just passing through Santa Rosa. I heard in town that you might be having some difficulties, and I wondered if perhaps we could talk." Tabitha's expression hardened immediately. "If you are here to make an offer on the property before the bank takes it, you can turn around right now. I am not interested in selling to vultures. No, madam, that is not why I am here." Russell kept his voice calm and gentle. "I understand you have debts that need paying, and I thought maybe I could help." "I do not need charity," she said sharply, her pride flaring despite her desperate circumstances. "I am not offering charity. I am proposing a business arrangement." Russell took a step closer, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers steadily. "I have capital that I am looking to invest. Your property has potential. I am willing to pay off your debts in exchange for a partnership. We would work the ranch together, split the profits, and both benefit from the arrangement." Tabitha stared at him as though he had just suggested they fly to the moon. "You do not even know me. Why would you offer such a thing?" Russell considered his answer carefully. "I have been drifting for a long time, madam, moving from place to place without putting down roots. I am tired of it. I am looking for something more permanent, and this place, this town, feels right. As for why I am offering to help you specifically, well, I suppose I do not like seeing people get crushed by circumstances beyond their control when I have the means to prevent it." She was silent for a long moment, studying him with those intelligent brown eyes. He could see her mind working, weighing the risks against the desperate need. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. "How much do I still owe? I spoke to the banker this morning. With interest, the total is $587. Tabitha closed her eyes briefly, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "And you would just pay that? For what, exactly? A partnership that benefits you how? This ranch barely breaks even in good years." "It barely breaks even because one person cannot do the work of two," Russell said. "Your husband built something solid here, but it needs proper attention. With both of us working it, raising good horses, maybe expanding into cattle, we could turn a real profit. I have the knowledge and the contacts. You have the land and the determination. Together, we could make this place thrive. And if I say no, then I will tip my hat, ride back to town, and you will never see me again. But madam, if I may be frank, I do not think you have many other options." The truth of his words hung between them like a physical weight. Tabitha looked around at her property, at the home she had shared with Thomas, at everything she was about to lose. Then she looked back at this stranger, who had appeared like some kind of answer to prayers. She had been too tired to even voice any more. "If I agree to this, I need your word that this is a legitimate business partnership. I will work, I will contribute equally, and I will not be treated as some helpless woman who needs a man to rescue her." Russell nodded seriously. "You have my word, equal partners." "And separate living arrangements," she added firmly. "You can use the small bunkhouse behind the barn. This is my home." "That is perfectly acceptable." Tabitha took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and extended her hand. "Then I suppose we have an agreement, Mr. Foster." Russell shook her hand, noting the calluses that proved she had been working herself nearly to death trying to save this place. "Please, call me Russell." "Tabitha," she replied, and for the first time since he arrived, he saw a flicker of something other than despair in her eyes. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just relief that the crushing weight of her debts would finally be lifted. They rode into town together that afternoon, and Russell walked into the bank with Tabitha at his side. Mr. Whitmore, the banker, was a florid-faced man in his 50s with mutton-chop whiskers and an expression of perpetual disapproval. His eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline when Russell counted out $587 in cash and requested the deed and all loan documents for the Jefferson property. "I am afraid I do not understand," Whitmore said slowly. "Are you purchasing the property from Mrs. Jefferson?" "No," Russell said calmly. "I am paying her debts. The property remains hers. I will need receipts showing the loans are satisfied in full." Whitmore looked between them with obvious confusion and a hint of suspicion. "This is highly irregular, but legal, I trust." Russell's voice was polite but firm. "Well, yes, of course it is legal, but then I would appreciate it if you could prepare the necessary paperwork. We have work to get back to." An hour later, they walked out of the bank with documents proving the Jefferson Ranch was free and clear of all debt. Tabitha clutched the papers to her chest, as though they might disappear if she loosened her grip. They stood on the boardwalk in the afternoon sun, and Russell saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "We are partners now," Russell reminded her gently. "We will build something good together, and that will be repayment enough." As they rode back to the ranch, Tabitha felt a confusing swirl of emotions. Relief, certainly, profound and overwhelming. Gratitude toward this stranger who had saved everything she had left of her life with Thomas. But also guilt, because some small part of her had noticed the way Russell Foster sat his horse with easy confidence, the way his voice rumbled low and warm, the way he looked at her with respect rather than pity. She was a widow. She was supposed to be mourning. She was not supposed to feel anything for another man, especially not so soon. But grief, she was learning, was not a simple thing. It did not follow rules or timelines. It existed alongside other feelings, sometimes overwhelming them, sometimes retreating to let other emotions surface. And whether she wanted to admit it or not, Russell Foster had awakened something in her that she thought had died with Thomas. Not love, certainly not yet, but a kind of awareness, an acknowledgement that she was still alive and still capable of feeling things beyond sorrow. Russell moved his few belongings into the small bunkhouse that evening. It was Spartan but adequate, with a narrow bed, a small stove, and a single window that looked out toward the hills. He had lived in far worse places during his years of wandering. After settling in, he walked the property as the sun set, assessing what needed immediate attention and what could wait. There was a lot of work ahead, but he found himself looking forward to it. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Russell woke before dawn and started on the most urgent repairs. The barn door came first, then several sections of fence that were so damaged they were essentially useless. Tabitha worked alongside him, and he was impressed by her competence and determination. She knew her way around tools and heavy work, though he could see she had been stretching herself too thin trying to maintain everything alone. They fell into an easy working rhythm over the following days. Russell handled the heavy repairs and the work with the horses, while Tabitha managed the house, the garden, and the cooking. She insisted on maintaining the separation between them, and Russell respected that boundary completely. They were polite to each other, professional, and slowly, carefully, they began to build a genuine friendship. One evening, about 2 weeks after their partnership began, they sat on the porch after a long day of work, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Tabitha had brought out coffee and they sipped it in comfortable silence for several minutes before she spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her voice was hesitant. "Of course. Why did you really do this?" I have been trying to understand, and the business explanation makes sense on the surface, but I do not think that is the whole truth." Russell was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "I suppose I recognized something in your situation," he finally said. "My family lost everything when I was young, through no fault of our own. Just bad luck and bad timing. I watched my father break under the weight of it, watched my mother work herself into an early grave trying to hold things together. I was too young then to do anything to help them. When I heard about your situation, I guess I saw a chance to do what I could not do for my own family." Tabitha absorbed this quietly. "I am sorry you went through that. It was a long time ago, but it shapes you, teaches you what matters. What matters to you, Russell." She was looking at him now, her face partially shadowed but her eyes visible in the lamplight from the house. "Fairness, decency. Leaving things better than you found them." He paused. "Not being alone all the time." She smiled slightly at that last part. "Is that why you stopped wandering?" "Part of it. I am 30 years old, Tabitha. I have been moving from place to place since I was 19. At some point, a man needs to build something that lasts, something that matters beyond just surviving day to day. And you think this ranch can be that?" "I think it already is," he said honestly. "You and Thomas built something real here. It just needs some attention and investment to reach its potential." The mention of Thomas created a brief, awkward silence. Tabitha looked away, staring out at the dark landscape. "He would have liked you," she said softly. "Thomas always respected men who dealt honestly and worked hard. He would have been grateful for what you have done. He must have been a good man to have earned your love. He was." Her voice was thick with emotion. "Not perfect, but good and kind and full of dreams. I miss him every single day." "I am not trying to replace him," Russell said gently. "I want you to know that. This partnership is not about that." "I know," Tabitha said, and she did know. Russell had been nothing but respectful and appropriate since the moment he arrived. And yet, she could not deny that she was increasingly aware of him as more than just a business partner. She noticed the way he moved, strong and capable. She noticed his quiet kindness, the way he spoke gently to the horses, the way he always asked her opinion before making decisions about the ranch. She noticed that when he smiled, which was rare but genuine, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. She was not ready to examine those feelings too closely. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas, even though some rational part of her brain insisted that Thomas would want her to be happy, would not want her to spend the rest of her life alone and grieving. But emotions were not rational, and guilt was a powerful force. As spring turned into summer, the ranch began to transform. Russell's repairs made everything more functional and efficient. He bought 4 more horses from a breeder in Sacramento, quality animals that he planned to train and sell at a profit. Tabitha expanded her garden significantly, planting vegetables they could sell in town along with what they needed for themselves. They worked from sunrise to sunset most days, exhausted but satisfied by the visible progress. The people of Santa Rosa watched the partnership with interest and varying degrees of judgment. Some thought it scandalous that a widow and an unmarried man were living on the same property, even with separate residences. Others admired Tabitha's determination to save her home and Russell's generosity in helping her. Dr. Harrison became a regular visitor, stopping by every week or two to check on them and usually staying for dinner. He approved of the arrangement and told anyone who would listen that Russell Foster was a man of exceptional character. One particularly hot afternoon in July, Russell was working with a young stallion in the training corral when the horse spooked at something and reared unexpectedly. Russell tried to maintain control, but the lead rope slipped through his hands and the rough hemp burned across his palm. leaving a deep, bleeding gash. He cursed under his breath and pressed his other hand against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Tabitha saw the incident from the garden and came running. "Let me see," she said urgently, pulling his hand away to examine the injury. The cut was deep and bleeding heavily. "Come inside. We need to clean and bandage this properly." She led him into the house, into her private space that he had never entered before. He was acutely aware of the intimacy of it, of being in the home she had shared with her husband. She directed him to sit at the kitchen table while she pumped water and gathered clean cloths and her medical supplies. "This is going to hurt," she warned, and then she began cleaning the wound with careful, efficient movements. Russell gritted his teeth against the pain but did not pull away. Her hands were gentle despite the necessary roughness of cleaning out dirt and debris. When she was satisfied it was clean, she applied a salve that smelled of herbs and then wrapped his hand with clean white bandaging. "You are good at this," Russell said, watching her work. "I had to be. Living out here, you learn basic medicine because the doctor is not always available." She tied off the bandage and finally looked up at him. "You should be more careful. That horse is not fully trained yet." "I know. I got careless." They were very close in the small kitchen, and Russell could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the tiny freckles across her nose that the sun had brought out. Tabitha met his gaze and something passed between them, a current of awareness that they both felt and both immediately tried to ignore. "Thank you," Russell said quietly. "You are welcome." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The moment stretched and then Tabitha stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. "I should get back to the garden before the heat gets worse." "Tabitha, wait." Russell stood, his injured hand forgotten. "I need to say something, and I need you to know I am not expecting anything from you by saying it." She turned back, her expression guarded. "What is it?" "I know this is complicated. I know you are still mourning Thomas, and I respect that completely. But I want you to know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just a business arrangement for me. I care about you. I care about what we are building here together. And if the time ever comes when you feel ready to consider something more between us, I would be honored. But if that time never comes, I will still be here, still be your partner, still be your friend. I just needed you to know." Tabitha stood very still, her heart hammering in her chest. She had known, of course, on some level. The way he looked at her sometimes, the extra care he took with things he knew mattered to her, the way his presence had become essential to her daily life. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Russell, She stopped, struggling to find the right words. "I am not ready. I do not know if I will ever be ready. Thomas has only been gone a year. People already talk about us as it is. I know. And I am not asking you to be ready. I am just being honest about where I stand. I cannot promise you anything. I am not asking for promises." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. "You deserve more than a broken widow who might never be whole again." Russell crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and gently took her face in his hands, his bandaged palm careful against her cheek. "You are not broken, Tabitha Jefferson. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You are grieving, which is right and natural. But you are not broken." A sob caught in her throat and suddenly she was crying, really crying for the first time since Thomas's funeral. All the grief and fear and exhaustion she had been holding inside came pouring out, and Russell pulled her against his chest and held her while she wept. He did not try to shush her or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her, steady and solid, letting her release the pain she had been carrying alone for too long. When the storm finally passed, Tabitha pulled back, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I am sorry. I should not have." "Do not apologize for being human," Russell said firmly. "You have been carrying too much by yourself for too long." She wiped her eyes with the corner of her apron. "This does not change anything. I am still not ready." "I understand. And Tabitha, I meant what I said. This does not change our partnership. I will still be here, no matter what." Over the following weeks, something subtle shifted between them. They were still partners, still friends, but there was an undercurrent of possibility now, acknowledged if not acted upon. Tabitha found herself watching Russell when he worked, appreciating not just his capability, but the man himself. She noticed the way he was patient with the horses, the way he always had a kind word for people they encountered in town, the way he sometimes sang quietly to himself when he thought no one was listening. She noticed that his presence no longer felt like an intrusion but like something essential, something she would miss desperately if it were gone. And slowly, gradually, the guilt began to ease. She talked to Thomas in her mind, the way she had been doing since he died, and she imagined what he would say. Thomas had loved her deeply and generously. He would not want her to be alone forever. He would want her to find happiness again, to build a new life while still honoring what they had shared. Understanding this intellectually was one thing, but feeling it in her heart was another, and that took time. In late August, a traveling preacher came through Santa Rosa, and Tabitha went to hear him speak on Sunday morning. Russell offered to come with her, and she accepted. They sat together in the small church, and when the preacher spoke about moving forward from loss while holding on to love, Tabitha felt like the words were meant specifically for her. After the service, several townspeople approached them, and she noticed that the judgment that had been present in some eyes earlier in the summer had softened into acceptance and even approval. Mrs. Henderson from the general store pulled her aside. "You look happier than I have seen you in a year, dear." "I am finding my way," Tabitha said carefully. "That man of yours is a good one. Thomas would have approved, I think." Tabitha was startled by the assumption that Russell was her man, but she did not correct it. Perhaps because some part of her was beginning to think of him that way, even if she was not quite ready to act on those feelings. That evening, she asked Russell to join her on the porch after dinner, in what had become their quiet ritual of ending the day together. The summer air was warm and sweet with the scent of the blooming flowers she had planted around the house. "Russell, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever think about the future? Not just the ranch, but your personal future?" He looked at her carefully, trying to read what was behind the question. "I think about it. Why do you ask?" "I have been thinking about what you said back in July, about caring for me, about wanting more if I was ever ready." She took a deep breath. "I am not saying I am ready now, but I am saying that I think maybe someday I could be, and I wanted you to know that." Russell felt his heart lift with hope, but he kept his voice steady. "That means more to me than you might realize. I am still figuring out who I am without Thomas. I do not want to jump into something before I am truly ready, because that would not be fair to either of us. Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." She reached over and took his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. His hand was rough and calloused and warm, and holding it felt both strange and right. "Thank you for being patient with me. You are worth waiting for, Tabitha." They sat there in the gathering darkness, hands linked, not saying anything more but not needing to. Something had shifted again, another step forward on a path neither of them had planned but both were beginning to choose. September brought harvest season, and they were busier than ever. The garden produced abundantly, and Tabitha spent long days canning and preserving vegetables for the winter. Russell sold 3 of the horses he had been training for excellent prices, and the profit went into their shared account at the bank. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were stable and secure, with money set aside for emergencies and plans for modest expansion in the spring. One evening, after they had been working particularly hard on bringing in the last of the harvest, Russell insisted on cooking dinner to give Tabitha a break. He made a simple but hearty stew, and they ate together at her kitchen table, which had become increasingly normal as the boundaries between their separate lives blurred. "I have been thinking," Russell said as he served second helpings, "about getting a few cattle. Not a large herd, just a dozen or so to start. We have the grazing land for it, and it would diversify our operation." "That makes sense," Tabitha agreed. "We could use the extra income, and you are right that we should not rely solely on horses." They discussed the details, the logistics and costs and timeline, and Tabitha marveled at how natural this was, planning their shared future. A year ago, she could never have imagined this life, this partnership that had become so central to her existence. After dinner, they walked out to check on the horses one final time before night fully fell. The air was cooling with the approach of autumn, and Tabitha wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Russell noticed and moved closer, his body warmth radiating toward her. "Cold, a little. But it feels good after the heat of summer." They stood at the corral fence, watching the horses settle for the night. One of the mares came over to investigate them, and Russell stroked her nose affectionately. "She trusts you," Tabitha observed. "Animals know when you respect them, when you care. They respond to that. People too, I think." Russell turned to look at her, and in the dim light she could see the warmth in his expression. "Is that your way of saying you trust me now?" "I have trusted you since the day you paid my debts without asking for anything in return," she said honestly. "What has taken longer is trusting myself, trusting that what I feel is real and not just gratitude or loneliness." "And what do you feel, Tabitha?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I feel like Thomas was my first love and he will always hold a piece of my heart. But I also feel like maybe, if I am brave enough, there could be room for a second love. A different love, but no less real." Russell turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to rest gently on her shoulders. "Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying I am ready to try, ready to see what this could be between us." Her voice trembled slightly. "If you are still interested, still interested." Russell laughed softly. "Tabitha, I have been half in love with you since the day I watched you try to fix that wagon wheel by yourself, too proud and determined to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. I am not half in love anymore. I am fully, completely, entirely in love with you." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were not tears of grief this time. "I love you too. I fought it for so long because I felt guilty, felt like I was betraying Thomas. But I finally understand that loving you does not diminish what I had with him. The heart is big enough for both." Russell pulled her close and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Tabitha wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, feeling like she was finally, truly coming back to life after being numb for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Well, I suppose we should probably get married," Russell said, "if you will have me." "That is a terrible proposal," Tabitha said, but she was laughing. "You are right. Let me try again." Russell took both her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Tabitha Jefferson, you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. I know I cannot replace what you lost, and I would never try. But I promise to love you with everything I have, to be your partner in all things, to build a life with you that honors both the past and the future. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Russell Foster, I will marry you." They married in October, a small ceremony in the Santa Rosa Church, with Dr. Harrison standing as Russell's witness and Mrs. Henderson as Tabitha's. Tabitha wore a simple blue dress that Russell had bought her as a gift, telling her that while she looked beautiful in work clothes, she deserved something special for their wedding day. The preacher who had come through in August had moved on, so the ceremony was performed by a circuit judge who happened to be in town. It was nothing like Tabitha's first wedding, which had been a larger affair with family and friends from San Francisco. But it was perfect in its own way, intimate and heartfelt and full of genuine joy. After the ceremony, they hosted a modest reception at the ranch. Several neighbors attended, along with friends from town who had come to know and respect the partnership that had blossomed into love. People brought food and drinks, and someone had a fiddle, so there was music and even some dancing. Tabitha found herself laughing more than she had in over a year, spinning in Russell's arms while their friends clapped and cheered. As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Russell and Tabitha stood together at the door of what was now their shared home, thanking everyone for coming. When the last wagon had rolled away down the road, they turned to each other. "Mrs. Foster," Russell said, testing out her new name. "Mr. Foster," she replied, smiling. "That is going to take some getting used to. We have plenty of time." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We have the rest of our lives." That night, they came together as husband and wife, and Tabitha was surprised by how different it felt from her first marriage. She had loved Thomas, but they had both been young and inexperienced, fumbling through intimacy with more enthusiasm than skill. Russell was older, more experienced, and infinitely patient. He took his time, learning what she liked, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Tabitha felt a peace she had not known was possible. She had survived the worst grief of her life and found her way to happiness again. It felt like a miracle. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and steady progress. Russell bought the cattle he had talked about, a dozen head that they planned to breed and expand over time. Tabitha continued managing the garden and the household finances, her sharp mind for numbers making her invaluable in tracking their income and expenses. They worked together on training the horses, with Tabitha proving to have a natural talent for gentling the younger animals. By the end of 1877, the ranch was not just stable but genuinely prosperous. In the spring of 1878, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She was 28 years old, which was not dangerously old for a first pregnancy but certainly not young by the standards of the time. She had always wanted children, had dreamed of them during her marriage to Thomas, but those dreams had died with him. Now they were resurrected, and she did not know how to feel about it. Russell was overjoyed, though he tried to temper his excitement when he saw her uncertainty. "Talk to me," he said gently one evening as they sat together after dinner. "What are you thinking about?" "I am happy," she said slowly. "Truly I am, but I am also scared. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this baby, or what if the birth goes badly? Women die in childbirth all the time, Russell. We will get you the best care available," he promised. "Dr. Harrison is excellent, and we will make sure you do not overwork yourself. We will do everything right." "And what about Thomas?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Is it wrong that I am having a baby with you when I never got to have one with him?" Russell pulled her close, understanding the guilt that she still carried despite all the progress she had made. "Thomas would be happy for you, for us. He loved you, and people who truly love want their loved ones to find happiness, even after they are gone. This baby is not a betrayal of him. This baby is a gift, a new beginning." Tabitha let herself be comforted, though the guilt did not entirely disappear. It was something she would have to work through, and she did over the following months. She talked to Thomas in her mind, imagining his response, and she truly believed he would be happy for her. She also talked to Dr. Harrison, who assured her that her fear was normal and that she was healthy and strong and had every reason to expect a good outcome. The pregnancy progressed well, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable, and she had to reduce her workload as she grew larger. Russell was incredibly attentive, taking on extra chores without complaint and fussing over her in a way that she found both annoying and endearing. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest every afternoon, and made sure she ate well and regularly. In November of 1878, after a long and difficult labor that lasted nearly a full day, Tabitha gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Russell Foster, honoring both the man she had lost and the man who had saved her. When Russell held his son for the first time, Tabitha saw tears streaming down his face, and she fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Russell whispered, staring down at the tiny red-faced infant in his arms. "You are perfect, thank you." "We made him together," Tabitha said tiredly, exhausted but happy. "He is ours." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Russell was a devoted father, waking for nighttime feedings even though he had to work the next day, spending every spare moment holding his son and marveling at him. Tabitha watched them together and felt her heart expand with love for both of them. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, growing slowly but steadily. They added more horses, more cattle, and eventually bought an additional 40 acres from a neighbor who was retiring and moving to Sacramento to live with his daughter. Little Thomas grew from baby to toddler to a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals and followed his father everywhere. In 1881, Tabitha became pregnant again, and this time she was less frightened, more confident in her body and the process. She gave birth to a daughter in early 1882, a beautiful little girl they named Rose Margaret Foster. Rose had Russell's coloring but Tabitha's delicate features, and she was as sweet-tempered as her brother was energetic. The family felt complete. They settled into a rhythm of life that was deeply satisfying. The work was hard but rewarding. The children were healthy and happy. The ranch was successful. Russell and Tabitha's love deepened with each passing year, maturing into something solid and unshakable. They still had their evening ritual of sitting together after the children were in bed, talking about the day and making plans for the future. Sometimes Tabitha would think about Thomas, especially on the anniversary of his death or their wedding. The grief never disappeared entirely, but it transformed over time from a sharp, constant pain into a gentle melancholy, a bittersweet acknowledgement of what she had lost and what she had found. She kept a photograph of Thomas in a frame in the parlor, and she told her children about him as they grew old enough to understand. "Your name comes from a very brave man," she told little Thomas when he was about 5 years old, sitting on his bed at bedtime. "He was my first husband, and he worked very hard to build this ranch. He died before you were born, but he would have loved you very much." "Is Papa my real Papa?" Thomas asked with a child's directness. "Yes, your Papa is your real Papa in every way that matters," Tabitha assured him. "The man I am telling you about, the other Thomas, he was part of our family story. He helped make this place what it is. But Russell Foster is your father, who loves you and takes care of you and will always be there for you." "Okay," Thomas said, accepting this with the easy understanding of a child. "I love Papa." "I know you do, sweetheart, and he loves you more than anything in the world." Russell, listening from the hallway, felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had never felt threatened by Thomas Jefferson's memory, had always understood that Tabitha's ability to love him did not diminish what she had felt for her first husband. He appreciated that she kept Thomas's memory alive and taught their children about him. It spoke to her loyalty and her integrity, qualities he loved about her. By 1885, when little Thomas was 7 and Rose was 3, the Foster Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the Santa Rosa area. They had a reputation for quality horses and fair dealing that brought customers from all over Northern California. Russell had also become active in local politics, serving on the town council and working to improve infrastructure and schools in the area. Tabitha was known for her charity work, often bringing food or supplies to families who were struggling, remembering all too well what it felt like to be on the edge of losing everything. One evening in late summer of that year, they sat on their porch as usual, watching the children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Rose how to catch fireflies, and their delighted laughter filled the air. Russell had his arm around Tabitha's shoulders, and she leaned into him contentedly. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Russell asked. "Of course. You had just told me you cared about me, and I told you I was not ready. I remember being terrified that I had pushed too hard, that I would lose your friendship." "You never could have," Tabitha said softly. "Even when I was fighting my feelings, even when I felt guilty for being attracted to you, I never wanted you to leave. You had become essential to me." "You saved me just as much as I saved you," Russell said. "I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions without any real purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build something that lasts. We built it together." "Yes, we did." They watched their children play as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tabitha thought about how far she had come from that desperate morning when she stood in her yard reading a notice from the bank, believing her life was over. She had been drowning in grief and debt, unable to see any path forward. And then Russell Foster had ridden into her life and thrown her a lifeline, not just financially but emotionally and spiritually as well. He had paid the debt that would have destroyed her, and slowly, patiently, he had helped ease the grief that had been suffocating her. She had loved Thomas deeply, and she always would carry that love in her heart. But she loved Russell too, differently but no less profoundly. He had shown her that the heart was capable of more than she had imagined, that it could hold both grief and joy, memory and hope, the past and the future all at once. "I love you," she said, turning to kiss him softly. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and they called the children inside for bed, Tabitha felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had found. It was not the life she had planned when she first came to Santa Rosa as a young bride full of dreams. But it was a good life, a full life, built on love and trust and partnership. She had survived the worst grief, the most desperate circumstances, and found her way to happiness again. And every day, she chose to honor both the love she had lost and the love she had found, knowing that both had shaped her into the woman she had become. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and the years continued to unfold with their mixture of challenges and triumphs. Thomas Jr. grew into a thoughtful, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and showed every sign of wanting to continue the family legacy. Rose was bright and spirited, with a talent for music that they nurtured by buying a piano and arranging for lessons when a teacher moved to Santa Rosa in 1890. In 1892, when Tabitha was 42 years old, she discovered she was pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. It was unexpected and carried more risks given her age. But the baby, another boy they named William, was born healthy and strong. Russell, at 46, found himself a father of 3, and he embraced this late addition to their family with the same joy and devotion he had shown to their first 2 children. As the century drew toward its close, Russell and Tabitha often reflected on how their lives had unfolded. They had started as strangers brought together by circumstance and desperation, and they had built something remarkable through hard work, patience, and love. Their partnership, both in business and in marriage, had proven stronger than either of them had dared to hope. The ranch that Thomas Jefferson had started and nearly lost was now a thriving operation that would pass to the next generation. The debt that had once threatened to destroy everything had long since been repaid through years of profit and careful management. The grief that had almost consumed Tabitha had been transformed into a bittersweet appreciation for both the love she had lost and the love she had found. On their 20th wedding anniversary in October of 1897, Russell and Tabitha hosted a celebration at the ranch. Their children, now 17, 15, and 5, helped with preparations. Friends and neighbors from all over the county attended, testament to the respect and affection the Foster family had earned over the years. Dr. Harrison, now quite elderly but still practicing, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 20 years ago, I sat in the hotel restaurant and told a stranger about a widow who was about to lose everything. I never imagined that conversation would lead to this, to one of the strongest and happiest marriages I have ever witnessed. Russell and Tabitha Foster have shown us all what is possible when people face adversity with courage and build their lives on foundation of genuine partnership and love. Here is to 20 more years and beyond. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. Russell pulled Tabitha close and kissed her in front of all their guests, not caring who saw. She laughed and kissed him back, thinking about how scandalous people had once found their partnership, how much judgment they had faced in those early days. None of that mattered now. They had proved the doubters wrong and built something that would last. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Russell and Tabitha returned to their porch, to the place where so many important conversations had happened over the years. Russell pulled out a small box from his pocket and handed it to Tabitha. "What is this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it and see." Inside was a beautiful locket on a delicate gold chain. When she opened it, she found 2 tiny photographs, one of Thomas Jefferson, taken before his death, and one of Russell. She looked up at her husband with tears in her eyes. "I know you still carry him in your heart," Russell said softly. "I never wanted to compete with that or diminish it. This is my way of saying I understand, and I am grateful for the path that led you to me, even though it included loss and pain. Both of us are part of your story, and that is as it should be." Tabitha could not speak for a moment, too overcome with emotion. Finally, she managed to whisper, "How did you get this photograph of Thomas?" "I asked Dr. Harrison if he knew where I might find one. He helped me track it down. I wanted you to have them both, to always remember that you can love us both without guilt or conflict." She threw her arms around him, clutching him tightly. "I do not know what I did to deserve you. You survived," Russell said simply. "You kept fighting when it would have been easier to give up. You opened your heart to the possibility of love again even when it scared you. That took more courage than anything I have ever done." She fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her heart. It was perfect, a symbol of her journey from grief to healing, from despair to hope, from being alone to finding partnership with this remarkable man. The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings. Thomas Jr. married a girl from town named Sarah Mitchell in 1899. and brought her to the ranch to live, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Russell moved into his 50s and began to slow down. Rose met a young teacher named Michael Preston and married him in 1903, moving to Sacramento but visiting often. William, the surprise late-life baby, grew into a clever, ambitious boy who talked about becoming a lawyer, much to everyone's amusement and pride. Russell and Tabitha grew old together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing, but their love never diminishing. They spent their later years enjoying their grandchildren, of whom there were eventually 6, and watching the ranch continue to thrive under Thomas Jr.'s management. They traveled occasionally, taking trips to San Francisco and once even making the long journey to New York City, fulfilling a dream Tabitha had held since childhood. But they always came back to Santa Rosa, to the ranch that had been saved from debt and despair and transformed into a legacy. The house had been expanded and improved over the years, but the porch where they had spent so many evenings remained unchanged. They still sat there together when weather permitted, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about the day and remembering the years that had passed. In the spring of 1910, when Tabitha was 60 and Russell was 64, they celebrated 32 years of marriage. Their family gathered at the ranch for the occasion. Their 3 children, their spouses, their grandchildren, and even Dr. Harrison, now 90 years old and frail but still sharp-minded and devoted to the family he had helped bring together. "You know," Russell said during the celebration, standing with his arm around Tabitha as they looked out at the gathering of people who had come from their love, "I have been thinking about that day I rode into Santa Rosa. I thought I was just stopping in a small town to sell some horses. I had no idea I was riding toward the most important thing that would ever happen to me. I was standing in front of the general store, drowning in debt and grief, with no hope left," Tabitha replied. "And then you came along and changed everything. You saved me, Russell. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You gave me a home, a purpose, a family, a reason to stop running and start building. I could not have done any of this without you." Thomas Jr. raised his glass. "To my parents, who showed me what a real partnership looks like. You built something remarkable here, not just this ranch, but a family and a life that will continue for generations." Everyone raised their glasses and drank the toast. Tabitha looked around at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the property that had been saved and grown, at the man beside her, who had been her rock and her love for more than 3 decades. She thought about Thomas Jefferson, whose memory she still honored, and whose photograph she still wore in the locket Russell had given her so many years ago. She thought about the journey she had taken from despair to hope, from widowhood to a second chance at love and happiness. The grief that had once threatened to drown her had transformed over the years into something gentler, a bittersweet appreciation for the fact that she had been loved deeply twice in one lifetime. Not everyone was so fortunate. The debt that could have destroyed her had been paid by a stranger who became first her partner, then her friend, and finally the love of her life. Together, they had built something that would outlast them both. As the celebration continued around them, Russell pulled Tabitha close and kissed her temple gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering horse trader who showed up out of nowhere. Thank you for seeing past my grief to the person I could become," she replied. "Thank you for being patient with me, for loving me even when I was not ready to love you back, for building this life with me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat," he said. "Every single moment. So would I." They stood together, surrounded by the family and community they had built, watching the sun set over the ranch that had been their shared dream and shared achievement. The widow who had been drowning in grief and debt had been saved by the cowboy who paid her debts and eased her grief. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love story had begun in desperation and survival, but it had become something far greater, a testament to the resilience of the human heart, the power of second chances, and the possibility of finding happiness even after the darkest grief. As twilight fell and the stars began to emerge in the California sky, Tabitha rested her head on Russell's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, still strong after all these years. She thought about how far they had come, all the obstacles they had overcome, all the joy they had found in each other and in the life they had built together. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with. The grief had not disappeared, but it had been transformed by love, by time, by the grace of a second chance that she had almost been too afraid to take. And for that, for all of it, she was profoundly, endlessly grateful.